There's a presentation you gave 7 years ago. You stumbled over a sentence. Your voice cracked. Someone in the third row looked at their phone. The whole thing lasted maybe 45 minutes, and objectively, it went well. Your supervisor told you it was excellent. A colleague sent you an appreciative email, but none of that matters, does it? Because what you remember, what plays on loop in your mind at 3 in the morning, is that single moment when you lost your train of thought for 5 seconds that felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, there was another presentation. Last month. It was flawless. You were confident, articulate, commanding. People told you afterward how impressed they were, but when you try to recall it now, the memory feels flat, generic, already fading into the background noise of your life. Why does the brain do this? Why does a single moment of embarrassment from years ago remain crystal clear while dozens of successes blur into nothing? Why do we carry our failures like stones in our pockets while our achievements slip through our fingers like sand? I am a cognitive narrator, and my purpose is to explore the architecture of our inner worlds, to understand why our minds build these prisons of the past, and to find the key that might unlock the door. What you're experiencing isn't a character flaw. It isn't weakness. It isn't even particularly unusual. It's the result of a fundamental feature of human neurology called negativity bias, a hardwired tendency of the brain to prioritize, process, and remember negative experiences with far greater intensity than positive ones. Your brain is functioning exactly as it was designed to. The problem is that it was designed for a world that no longer exists. Think of your mind as an ancient security system, one that has been refined over millions of years of evolution. This system has one primary directive: keep you alive. And in the environment where this system evolved, a world of predators, scarcity, and constant physical danger, the key to survival wasn't remembering where you found food last Tuesday. It was remembering where you almost got killed. Our ancestors, who spent their mental energy fondly recalling pleasant sunsets, didn't survive long enough to become our ancestors. The ones who survived were the ones who remembered every near miss, every threat, every mistake with perfect haunting clarity. They were the ones whose brains evolved to treat negative experiences like emergency broadcasts, interrupting all other programming to ensure the message got through. This matters. Remember this. Don't let this happen again. And so here we are, tens of thousands of years later, carrying around a brain that treats a professional misstep with the same neurological urgency it would treat a saber-toothed tiger. Your mind doesn't know the difference between a genuine threat to your survival and a threat to your ego. It just knows that something bad happened, and it needs you to remember. This is the ghost in your machine, an evolutionary alarm system that cannot be turned off, only understood. And understanding it is the first step toward changing your relationship with your past. But there's something else happening here, something more insidious than simple negativity bias. It's not just that we remember negative experiences more vividly. It's that every time we remember them, we reconstruct them. We add new details, new emotions, new meanings. Memory, you see, is not a recording. It's not a video file stored somewhere in the archives of your mind, waiting to be played back with perfect fidelity. Memory is an act of creation, of reconstruction, performed anew each time you access it. And here's where the real trouble begins. Each time you remember that presentation, that failure, that moment of shame, you're not just retrieving a memory. You're rebuilding it with the emotional tools you have right now in this present moment. If you're anxious today, the memory becomes more anxiety-inducing. If you're feeling inadequate, the memory becomes evidence of your inadequacy. The past doesn't stay in the past. It travels forward with you, shape-shifting to match your current emotional state. This creates a feedback loop, a spiral. You remember the failure. The memory makes you feel bad. Feeling bad makes you more likely to remember failures. And around we go, trapped in what psychologists call rumination, the compulsive focus on negative thoughts and their causes and consequences. But what if I told you that the very vividness of these memories, their persistence, their power, is actually evidence of how distorted they've become? What if the clarity you feel when recalling these failures is not a sign of their accuracy, but of how many times you've reconstructed them, each time adding another layer of meaning, another coat of emotional paint? By the end of this exploration, I want to show you something that might seem impossible right now, that you can change your relationship with these memories without changing the past itself, that you can become the editor of your own story, not by deleting the difficult chapters, but by understanding what purpose they serve and choosing what meaning they hold. The past is not as solid as it feels. Your failures are not as defining as they seem. And the alarm system in your head, the one that keeps replaying these moments, can be understood, worked with, and gradually recalibrated. But first, we need to understand exactly how this system works, how a brain designed to protect you has become your most persistent critic. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's not a real person, but she is real in the sense that her story is a composite of dozens of conversations I've encountered, patterns I've studied, experiences that represent a fundamental truth about how negativity bias operates in the wild terrain of a human life. Sarah was 28 when she made what she calls the biggest mistake of her career. She was working at a mid-sized marketing firm, and she'd been given the opportunity to pitch a major client, the kind of account that could define the trajectory of her career. She prepared for weeks. She researched, she rehearsed, she refined every slide of her presentation until it felt perfect. The pitch went well. Not perfectly, nothing ever is, but well. She was articulate, confident, responsive to questions. The clients seemed engaged. Her team seemed pleased. But there was one moment, about 15 minutes in, when she misread a data point. It was a small error. She caught it immediately, corrected it with a self-deprecating joke that landed well, and moved on. The rest of the presentation was flawless. They didn't win the account. The client went with a larger agency that could offer services Sarah's firm didn't provide. It was a business decision, pure and simple, one that her supervisor assured her had nothing to do with her presentation. That was 7 years ago. Sarah is now 35. She's changed jobs twice, received multiple promotions, successfully pitched dozens of clients. By any objective measure, her career is thriving. But that one presentation, that one small mistake, remains more vivid in her memory than any of her successes. She can tell you exactly what she was wearing that day. She can describe the expression on the face of the senior client when she made the error, a subtle narrowing of the eyes that she has interpreted and reinterpreted 1,000 times. She can recreate the exact feeling of her stomach dropping, the heat rising to her face, the micro-pause before she corrected herself. What she cannot tell you with any clarity is the content of the successful pitch she delivered just 3 months ago. It happened, it went well, she won the account. But the memory is flat, generic, already dissolving into the general category of things that went fine. This is negativity bias in action, but it's also something more. Sarah's brain isn't just remembering that presentation more clearly because it was negative. It's actively reconstructing it each time she thinks about it, making it more negative, more significant, more defining than it actually was. Here's what's happening at a neurological level. Negative experiences trigger a more intense response in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. This intense activation causes the brain to encode the memory with greater detail and emotional weight. It's as if the brain is saying, "This is important. File this under critical information for survival." But positive experiences don't trigger this same intensity of response. A successful presentation registers as goal achieved, threat avoided, and gets filed away in a much more cursory fashion. The brain's attitude toward success is essentially, great. Moving on, what's the next potential threat? This means that from the very moment of encoding, the moment an experience becomes a memory, negative events are given preferential treatment in terms of detail, emotional intensity, and storage strength. The playing field isn't level. It never was. But here's where reconstructive memory enters the equation and where things get truly complicated. Every time Sarah thinks about that presentation, and she thinks about it often, especially when facing new professional challenges, she's not accessing some pristine recording of the event. She's rebuilding the memory from fragments, using her current emotional state, her current beliefs about herself, and her current fears as the construction materials. 7 years ago, Sarah was nervous but hopeful. She saw the mistake as unfortunate but recoverable. She believed her supervisor when he said it wasn't her fault. But over the years, as she's faced other challenges, other moments of self-doubt, she's returned to that memory again and again, and each time she's reconstructed it through a slightly different lens. The client's expression has become more disapproving in her memory. Her own mistake has become more egregious. The joke she made to recover has transformed from something that landed well into something awkward and desperate. The encouragement from her supervisor has been reframed as empty politeness. The memory has metastasized, growing more toxic with each reconstruction. This is what psychologists call the misinformation effect, the way post-event information, including our own subsequent thoughts and feelings, becomes integrated into our memory of the original event. Sarah's memory of the presentation isn't a record of what happened. It's a record of every time she's thought about what happened, each layer of reconstruction adding new emotional weight, new interpretive meaning. And here's the truly insidious part. The more vivid the memory becomes, the more confident Sarah feels about its accuracy. She doesn't experience it as a reconstruction. She experiences it as a moment of painful clarity, a true seeing of a defining failure. The memory's power convinces her of its truth. This is why negativity bias is so persistent, so resistant to challenge. It's not just that negative memories are more vivid, it's that they're more vivid in a way that feels like truth, like insight, like finally seeing yourself clearly. The brain's alarm system doesn't just remember the threat. It convinces you that the threat is more real, more important, more defining than anything else. Meanwhile, Sarah's successes, and there have been many, remain frustratingly elusive in her memory. She knows, intellectually, that she's accomplished things. She can consult her resume, read old emails of congratulation, remind herself of the objective facts, but she can't feel those successes the way she feels that failure. The positive memories lack emotional weight, lack detail, lack the visceral sense of truth that the negative memory possesses. This creates a profound distortion in Sarah's self-perception. When she thinks about who she is as a professional, she has immediate, emotionally vivid access to evidence of her inadequacy, but only abstract, intellectual access to evidence of her competence. The playing field of self-assessment is catastrophically tilted. And this tilt isn't just about memory, it shapes her present moment experience. When Sarah faces a new challenge, a new pitch, a new opportunity, that old memory surfaces unbidden. It feels like wisdom, like her brain trying to protect her by reminding her of past dangers. But what it's actually doing is projecting a distorted reconstruction of a single minor mistake onto the screen of her present moment, convincing her that history is about to repeat itself. The alarm system that evolved to keep our ancestors safe from predators is now keeping Sarah safe from success, from risk, from the very opportunities that might allow her to create new, positive memories that could balance the equation. The ghost in the machine isn't just remembering the past, it's haunting the present and threatening the future. But knowing all of this, understanding negativity bias, understanding reconstructive memory, doesn't make Sarah's experience any less painful. In fact, there's a particular kind of suffering that comes from knowing your thoughts are distorted, but being unable to stop thinking them. This is where we need to examine the emotional engine that powers this entire system, the psychological mechanism that transforms a cognitive bias into a persistent source of suffering, rumination. Rumination is the cognitive equivalent of pacing. It's the mind moving in circles, retracing the same paths, wearing grooves deeper and deeper into the landscape of consciousness. It's asking yourself the same unanswerable questions over and over. Why did I do that? What was I thinking? What if I had done something different? How could I have been so stupid? For Sarah, rumination about that presentation doesn't just happen when she consciously decides to think about it. It happens automatically, triggered by any experience that even remotely resembles the original situation. A new pitch meeting, a moment of public speaking, someone looking at their phone during a presentation, even just feeling nervous for any reason can pull that memory out of storage and drop it into her present awareness. And once the rumination begins, it's extraordinarily difficult to stop. This is because rumination feels productive, it feels like problem solving. Sarah's mind tells her that if she just thinks about it enough, examines it from enough angles, analyzes what went wrong with sufficient detail, she'll finally understand it, learn from it, prevent it from happening again. The rumination presents itself as preparation, as diligence, as responsibility. But rumination is not problem solving. Problem solving has a beginning, middle, and end. It generates solutions and then moves on. Rumination has no end. It generates only more questions, more anxiety, more self-criticism. It's a closed loop, a hamster wheel of thought that creates the illusion of forward movement while keeping you trapped in the same spot. Here's what's happening psychologically. Rumination serves to keep the memory active in your conscious awareness, which means you're constantly reconstructing it, constantly reinforcing its neural pathways, constantly making it more accessible and more vivid. Each episode of rumination is like taking the memory out, examining it under harsh fluorescent lighting, adding new interpretations and new emotional weight, and then filing it right back at the front of the drawer where you'll reach for it again tomorrow. This is how a single mistake 7 years ago can feel more relevant to Sarah's identity than 7 years of accumulated success. The success happened, was noted, and was filed away. The failure happens every single time she thinks about it, which is often. In terms of psychological presence, in terms of emotional weight, the failure isn't in the past at all. It's in the present, constantly being recreated, constantly being experienced as if it's happening now. And there's an evolutionary logic to this, twisted though it may be. Remember, the brain's primary directive is safety, not happiness. From an evolutionary perspective, it's better to be overly cautious, to treat every potential threat as real, to remember every failure as a warning, than to be optimistic and potentially make the same mistake twice. Our ancestors who ruminated about that time they almost got eaten by a predator were more likely to survive than those who quickly forgot about it and wandered carelessly into danger again. But Sarah isn't being stalked by predators. She's being stalked by her own mind, by a safety system that cannot distinguish between a life-threatening situation and an emotionally uncomfortable one. The rumination that might have kept her ancestors alive is keeping her trapped, replaying a minor professional stumble as if it were a matter of life and death. There's also an element of what psychologists call emotional reasoning at play here, because Sarah feels so much shame and anxiety when she remembers the presentation, because the memory is so emotionally charged. Her brain interprets that emotional intensity as evidence that the event must have been genuinely significant, genuinely terrible, genuinely defining. The logic goes, I feel this bad about it, therefore it must have been that bad. The intensity of the emotion is mistaken for truth about the event. This creates yet another feedback loop. The rumination maintains the memory's vividness. The vivid memory generates strong emotions. The strong emotions convince Sarah that the memory is important and accurate. The belief in its importance and accuracy drives more rumination, and so on in an ever-tightening spiral. Meanwhile, Sarah's successes remain emotionally flat precisely because she doesn't ruminate about them. She doesn't take them out and examine them repeatedly. She doesn't reconstruct them through different emotional lenses. She doesn't ask herself, why did I do so well? What was I thinking? How did I manage to be so capable? The successes are allowed to remain in the past, to fade naturally, while the failures are dragged forcibly into the present, again and again. This is the cruel arithmetic of negativity bias combined with rumination. Negative memories are encoded more strongly, then repeatedly reconstructed and reinforced through rumination, while positive memories are encoded more weakly and then allowed to fade through benign neglect. Over time, your internal library of self-knowledge becomes catastrophically skewed. You have volumes upon volumes of detailed, vivid, emotionally saturated memories of your failures, and perhaps a few index cards worth of vague recollections of your successes. Is it any wonder, then, that Sarah struggles to maintain a balanced view of herself? Is it any wonder that when she's asked to evaluate her own competence, her mind immediately serves up that presentation from 7 years ago with perfect clarity, while her recent successes remain frustratingly abstract? The alarm system isn't just remembering threats, it's manufacturing them, creating a present moment experience of danger out of reconstructed fragments of the past. And the more Sarah tries to figure it out, to analyze it, to understand what went wrong and why, the stronger the memory becomes. The attempt to solve the problem is the problem. So where does this leave us? If our brains are hardwired with negativity bias, if our memories are constantly being reconstructed in ways that amplify our failures, if rumination keeps these painful experiences perpetually present, are we simply condemned to be haunted by our pasts forever? The answer is no. But the path forward isn't what you might expect. It's not about positive thinking or forcing yourself to focus on your successes or trying to convince yourself that your failures weren't real or didn't matter. The path forward begins with understanding something fundamental about human consciousness. You are not the collection of things that have happened to you. You are the story you tell about those things. This is the concept psychologists call narrative identity. The idea that we understand ourselves, our lives, our very sense of who we are through the stories we construct about our experiences. Sarah isn't haunted by a presentation that happened 7 years ago. She's haunted by the story she's been telling herself about that presentation, a story that has been reconstructed and reinforced so many times that it feels like immutable truth. But here's the profound implication of narrative identity. If your sense of self is a story, then you can become the editor of that story, not by changing the facts, the presentation happened, the mistake was made, but by changing the meaning, the context, the role that this event plays in your larger narrative. Right now, Sarah's story goes something like this. I'm someone who makes critical mistakes at crucial moments. That presentation proved it. Every time I face a similar situation, I'm reminded that I'm fundamentally not good enough for these opportunities. But that's not the only story these facts support. Here's another one. I'm someone who was given a challenging opportunity early in my career. I prepared extensively, delivered a strong presentation, made one small error which I corrected gracefully, and received positive feedback from my team. We didn't win the account for reasons beyond my control. Since then, I've developed my skills, won dozens of pitches, and built a successful career. That early presentation taught me how to handle mistakes with grace and showed me that a single error doesn't define an outcome. Same facts, different story, different meaning, different implications for identity. The key to changing your relationship with your past isn't to somehow force your brain to remember failures less vividly or successes more vividly. That's fighting against millions of years of evolution, and it's a fight you'll lose. The key is to recognize that memory isn't truth. It's a reconstruction. And if you're going to be reconstructing your memories anyway, which you are whether you realize it or not, you might as well do it consciously, intentionally, with an awareness of the story you want those memories to tell. This isn't about self-deception. It's about recognizing that the story you've been telling yourself is already a construction, already a selective interpretation, already shaped by cognitive biases and repeated reconstruction. You're not replacing truth with fiction. You're replacing one interpretation with another, one that is potentially more accurate, more balanced, and more aligned with the full context of your life. This is where cognitive reframing enters the picture, the practice of deliberately shifting your perspective on a situation to change its emotional impact and its meaning. For Sarah, this might mean asking different questions about that presentation. Not why did I fail, but what did I learn? Not what does this prove about my inadequacy, but what does my 7 years of subsequent success prove about my resilience? It means recognizing that the vivid clarity of the negative memory is not a sign of its accuracy or its importance. It's a sign of how many times she's reconstructed it, each time through a lens of anxiety and self-criticism. The very vividness that makes the memory feel true is actually evidence of how distorted it has become. Here's a practice I want to offer you, whether you're Sarah or someone with your own version of her story. The next time you find yourself ruminating about a past failure, I want you to do something different. Instead of asking, why did this happen? Or what does this mean about me? I want you to ask, what story am I telling myself about this? What other stories could these same facts support? Write them down. Actually write them. Don't just think about them in the abstract. Take the facts of the situation, just the verifiable facts, stripped of interpretation, and construct 3 different narratives about what they mean. Make one of them the story you've been telling yourself. Make another one the kindest, most compassionate story you could possibly tell. And make the third one the story that a wise, impartial observer might tell, someone who cares about accuracy but has no investment in making you feel either better or worse about yourself. You'll notice something interesting when you do this. You'll notice that the story you've been telling yourself is not actually based on the facts. It's based on one particular interpretation of the facts, an interpretation that has been filtered through negativity bias, reconstructed through the lens of rumination, and reinforced until it feels like the only possible truth. But it's not the only possible truth. It's one story among many. And you get to choose which story you want to tell, which meaning you want these events to have in your life. This doesn't mean the pain disappears immediately. It doesn't mean the negative memories will suddenly become less vivid. Remember, you're working against an evolutionary alarm system that's been refined over millions of years. But what it does mean is that you can gradually change your relationship with these memories. You can begin to see them not as immutable truths about your worth or your capabilities, but as events that happened, were interpreted in a particular way, and can be reinterpreted differently. Over time, with practice, you can build new neural pathways, new habits of thought. You can teach yourself to notice when you're ruminating and gently redirect your attention. You can practice telling yourself more balanced stories. You can learn to treat that surge of shame or anxiety not as truth, but as the alarm system doing what it was designed to do, sounding an alarm that, in this case, is a false alarm. The past doesn't change, but your relationship with it can. The memories don't disappear, but their power over you can diminish. The alarm system doesn't shut off, but you can learn to hear it, acknowledge it, and choose not to be controlled by it. Sarah still remembers that presentation. She probably always will because negativity bias means it was encoded with particular strength. But Sarah, 7 years later, Sarah who has practiced reframing, practiced self-compassion, practiced recognizing rumination for what it is, doesn't have the same relationship with that memory that she used to. She can remember it now without spiraling. She can acknowledge that it was uncomfortable, that she wishes it had gone differently, and then let it be what it is. One moment among thousands, one data point among hundreds, one story that doesn't have to define the entire narrative. The alarm system in her head still remembers that there was once a threat, but Sarah has learned that remembering a threat is not the same as being in danger. The ghost is still there, but it's lost its power to haunt. This is the work of being human, learning to live with a brain that evolved for a different world, that treats minor failures as major threats, that remembers the negative with painful clarity while letting the positive slip away. We don't get to choose the hardware we're born with, but we do get to choose how we work with it. Your brain's negativity bias isn't a flaw. It's a feature, one that kept your ancestors alive long enough to become your ancestors. The problem isn't the bias itself. The problem is that you've been treating its outputs, those vivid, persistent negative memories, as objective truth rather than what they actually are, urgent bulletins from an overzealous security system. You are not the worst thing that's ever happened to you. You are not the sum of your failures, no matter how vividly you remember them. You are the author of your own story, and the first step toward writing a new story is recognizing that the old story was a construction, a reconstruction, a particular interpretation that felt like truth because it was repeated until it became familiar. The past is not as solid as it feels. Your failures are not as defining as they seem. And the alarm system in your head, the one that keeps replaying these moments, can be understood, worked with, and gradually recalibrated, not by fighting against it, but by learning its language and choosing how to respond. Thank you for taking this journey with me through the architecture of memory, bias, and rumination. If this exploration resonated with you, I invite you to share your own experience in the comments. What stories have you been telling yourself about your past? What might change if you became the conscious editor of those stories? Until next time, remember, the ghosts of your past failures only have as much power as the stories you tell about them allow. And you are the author of those stories.